Okay, and we are recording. Welcome everybody to another episode of News on China into the Headlines, episode 6. So we've got this running thing going where we change the name every time.
A friend of ours say you guys should call it Lost in the Headlines because you guys
That's actually a good one too, because the whole concept before, last week was inside the headlines. But you know what? It's not about the destination; it's about the journey. So go into the headlines with us. It sounds like a David Attenborough adventure special now. It's so much better. But lost in the headlines. I think we might use that one next time. That's pretty good.
Actually, I liked what one of the the listeners, the viewers said, the beyond the headlines. It kind of brings out the little tricky in me, kind of beyond. So that kind of journey is into the future.
Well, we're gonna have to make a list.
I think it's a trend, right? It's like a brand.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, maybe
when we run out of English words, we can use Portuguese ones. So there's quite a few.
I'll have to. Yeah, that'll be difficult for me. You'll have to introduce the show at that point then. All right. So welcome everybody. So we've got Tings and Marco with us. We've got a lot of new subscribers. So we should just explain they do News on China on their own channel where they do 60-second videos of the most interesting or at least interesting to us headlines from the previous week related to China. And then over on my channel, we do the in-depth kind of talk on some of those headlines. So definitely go over to their channel and check it out also. It's a great way to keep up to date on the headlines. A lot of the times the headlines will come out there first as well. But how about we start with this week's video? So on your side, you're actually on your 44th episode. So let's pull up that video here and we'll start with that. All right, so there we go. Great video as always, and that's the name Dongsheng News. I'm going to be putting in the description the link directly to your channel as well, and all of your different sites. But how about we get into the first headline that you want to talk about? What do you want to talk about first?
Sure. I mean, just as a little thing, because you mentioned there's quite a few new subscribers. We've been following your channel, and
more than 30,000 new subscribers.
The last week, the huge surge. We should figure out a year-on-year surge, Daniel Dumbrell show, 20% year-on-year surge.
Week on week.
Week on week.
Right. Am I going to be in your next China headlines? 60 seconds?
Yes, exactly.
All right.
Good idea. You might appear in a video of a video, very meta. Well, one of the things, just for your viewers as well, is that, we do the 60-second video, but the 60-second video is actually a summary of the digest, the newsletter that we do every week, which is the top 10 stories. So I encourage anyone who's watching here, you can go check out at dongshengnews.org. That comes out every Saturday. But on every Friday, we also do a short Africa Weekly. So it's a series of 3 stories, top stories about China-Africa relations, because I think like many of us are trying to understand better the relationship between China and Africa in our times. So those are 2 things that your viewers can check out if they want to read more about the stories.
And we have a Twitter.
The same handle.
Yep.
Dongsheng News.
The Twitter. Yeah. Welcome to the toxicity that is Twitter. It's a whole different world on Twitter. I just kind of enjoy it, but we'll get it. Actually, what I'll probably do is towards the end of this, I'll share an interesting tweet with you when we get onto the topic of why this growth happened. But yeah, we'll start first with your first headline that you want to talk about.
Sure. It's one of the stories in the video. I think it's adding to, last week we already talked about, the epic historic Alaska meeting between the high-level diplomats between U.S. and China. So I think this week we're adding into this other part about this new phase of the U.S.-China conflict. We're trying to play with some words here. It's kind of a divorce, but at the same time, it's like an opening up of a relationship. There's coupling and there's decoupling. And the first story really is looking into at this time of heightened conflict between U.S. and China, increasing sanctions, we are also seeing another movement, particularly around the financial sector. Let's say a new entry into coupling, where China is opening up its financial market slowly to Western investment. So Marco is actually going to talk about that story.
Okay.
Okay. So I think you're okay. So the news that is in the video is this announcement of J.P. Morgan, one of the biggest U.S. banks, that announced a $410 million stake in a China Merchant Bank subsidiary. This is still to be confirmed. It's still not approved, but I mean this is a trend from the last year, as we know. Just to give you one idea, so China's asset management industry grew 10 times from 2010 to 2019. So now it's worth $16 trillion US. So that's a huge market. So actually, this announcement of JP Morgan is followed by many other announcements in the last months. The biggest banks like Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, or big investment funds like BlackRock, Vanguard, everybody is coming to China. This was actually part of the trade deals from the last couple of years, still like during Trump administration. But we know how much trouble already we had with tech sector, even agribusiness. There's a lot of conflict in the last year, especially. But looks like so far, Wall Street is getting along with Beijing, which is quite a little bit surprising at this point. But I think it just adds more complexity into this relation, because we know there's a whole narrative we've been talking about, and you were talking about in the last days a lot about that, how much US is coming after China strongly in many senses. But in this particular case, finance market of China is being opening up to US. And it's a huge market. We're talking about 47 trillion US dollars. That's more or less what the estimated value of the Chinese market. And of course, I mean, we are talking about a huge market, which is actually it's in some sectors it will be already the second biggest finance market in the world, just after US. It's going to surpass UK, at least in some of the sectors of the big finance market. So one of the things that is actually changing is that so far, the foreign banks who wanted to invest in China, to have business in China, they had to do joint ventures with Chinese institutions, like they did with all the other sectors, like automobiles, industry, etc. So what's changing now since last year, that China gave a green light to the finance institutions to take over the joint ventures. So Goldman Sachs already announced, BlackRock announced, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, they are all buying their participation. And I mean, probably this year, this is an ongoing process. They will have full autonomy to do the investments in China. It's for instance, if you look to funds, the investment funds market in China, it's huge. It's also expected to grow to 3.4 trillion US dollars by 2023. And there's the huge potential in China, because one thing that Daniel mentioned actually a few weeks ago is like how much Chinese people, the importance of having a property, having house, having land, and how much they invest on that. So actually, from the savings of the families in China, 2/3 are invested in real estate, and 20% is held in cash. So only 7% of the savings of the families are invested in stocks and investment funds. If you compare to the US is 32% of the household savings are in stocks investment funds. So of course, Wall Street now, they are salivating, they're craving. There's a lot of money they can make in the next years in China. And the point is how much this will conflict with, for instance, Biden administration or the deep state policies to China. Because we know that, for instance, the US big techs, of course, they are big competitors of Chinese big techs and technology companies. But in case of Wall Street, this is something that it's a sort of a question mark for the next months and years.
Well, you think about the implications to them. I mean, Wall Street pretty much owns Congress to begin with, and so they were always worried about Chinese companies coming into the US. Actually, from their perspective, they should be more worried about American companies coming into China, because all of a sudden American companies have a vested interest in fighting back against anti-China propaganda. They're all of a sudden, if they've got business here, they're like, okay, no, guys, we're not on board for this ridiculous stuff anymore. The implications are huge, yeah, and we're seeing that transition happen with what you mentioned. Opening up the financial markets. I think it was last year or 2 years ago. They opened up like IPOs and Class A shares here to foreigners. Obviously, you saw Tesla come in and create an auto company here without the need for a partnership like before. I think the focus for a real strategic person in the U.S., that's probably the bigger concern. Not Chinese companies buying up America, but American companies starting to buy up bits of China, because it will really clash with their propaganda campaigns if all of a sudden their paymasters, who gave them that big check to become a senator to begin with, says, no, you know what, lay off on China a bit.
Exactly. That's the point. I mean, the thing is that how much we know that ruling class is the lead of the countries. They are not one single group. There are many different groups. They're different interests. Like Google interests is not the same necessarily as JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs. And the deep state also has their own 20, 30 years strategic interests. So the question in the next months and years to come is like, okay, how these contradictions are going to develop in the US. And also one interesting thing is to think about how China was strategic with that, because it's not by chance they are opening up the finance market now. Remember, they promised to do this in 2001 when they joined WTO. That was part of the deal. Say, okay, you are welcome to our club, China government, but you guys have to open up the finance market. Say, okay, yeah, we're going to do that. Don't worry, we're going to do that. That's like 20 years ago. They're opening now. But now they are opening, having a huge finance sector. They have huge institutions.
Actually, one of the things if you can pull up that image now, the one we sent you. Yeah. Talking about this huge financial sector, this is something quite shocking to think about the world's biggest banks. So this is what we're looking at right now. If you look at the top 5 there, 4 out of the 5 biggest banks right now in the world are Chinese.
Yeah. ICBC is the first.
And the Construction Bank, Agricultural Bank of China, and then we have Bank of China in number 5. So these are huge institutions that have been created, as Marco was saying, in these last, specifically in these last 20 years, with this, strengthening of its own domestic financial sector to be able to receive, let's say, this kind of foreign investment. But at the same time, just on the point that Daniel, you just mentioned, what should be in the interest of the U.S. to really, if they wanted to really decouple, let's say, but there's actually not that much interest from this sector of society, as well from the Chinese side. They're actually trying to preempt the possibilities of U.S. financial sanctions and actually worsening of that. And in fact, it's kind of maybe not coincidental that in this moment, they're actually trying to open and welcome that financial investment. So there's a huge flurry coming in right now. And that's what we're seeing, at this point. But at the same time, when they create these huge institutions, there's also, I mean, who's calling the shots here? China has their own level of financial controls. I mean, we've been seeing that.
That's the key, isn't it? Because, like you were saying, to give more context to the way that they did it smart, was they built the infrastructure up first. I mean, if you imagine if everything, the entire financial sector was built up with foreign funds to begin with, I mean, foreign companies would basically own China. I think I remember hearing about Deng Xiaoping specifically taking the example of how the Soviet Union was targeted, and it was through their financial sector, which is exactly why they wanted to take this slow approach to growth. So not only do they have a good foundation on their own, where whoever comes in isn't going to be calling the shots, but they've got mechanisms in place to avoid the same problems that the US has, keeping money away from politics. All of these different mechanisms, whether it be finance or, you look at one of the things that they want Jack Ma to do, they want him to divest from his media investments, because they look at him as this powerful person who owns these, this company that's giving loans to kids, students and things like that. And then they've got the media side that could push them towards it. I mean, that's a dangerous, you'll end up with, or an even worse situation like in Australia, where the Murdoch media basically owns everything, even tiny little newspapers that don't make any money, because it's for the purpose of influence for other purposes rather than this media outlet actually making money. It's for influence. So I think that was a really important move, to build the infrastructure and build the safety mechanisms before they allowed this.
Yeah, this is what they did with the whole economy. I mean, if you think, I mean, they did with the cars, they did with the whole industry. So they did with, I mean, technology. They have Huawei now, but that was like also a sort of like a planned. It was a strategy, like it's a 20, 30 years of strategy. And it's interesting because you mentioned Jack Ma, and we are going to bring that, because, I mean, if there's any doubt about who is going to be in charge of the financial sector, rules, regulations, etc., just look at what happened with Jack Ma last year. Remember that he was here in Shanghai. There was some sort of summit and discussions about finance market, and he publicly criticized Chinese finance regulations. So, I mean, that was sort of like the like we say, this last drop. We say in the last drop. Yeah. And what the government did was like, okay, you guys don't mess with us about that. You guys are not going to dictate how the finance sector works. And what happened, actually, they suspended the biggest IPO of the history. It was going to be $37 billion of the Ant Group. So there's no doubt, and it's actually what you're saying now. That's the big difference in China, is that there's a lot of billionaires, a lot of rich people, very powerful people, but they don't control politics. And this is something that the Westerners have to understand. This is a different system. And to be honest,
sorry. Go ahead. Can you finish?
No. It's just that. It's just. I mean, you hear the criticisms of the West as if it was more democratic to be run by Rupert Murdoch or by BlackRock. I mean,
or you look at Jeff Bezos buying up. What was it? New York Times or Washington Post?
Washington Post.
Washington Post. He has massive contracts with the CIA also for the cloud services and things like that. It's like when you get to that level of influence, these people are owning society. And so one thing people need to understand also is, from a government official point of view, having an open system which would work more like the U.S. system, it would not only benefit the big kind of tycoons like Jack Ma, it would also benefit the government officials if they did it that way. Because all of a sudden, the government officials are in bed with these kinds of people, and the government is making money from them. They're making money from the government, and the little guy gets left out. So the government is actually taking a step, saying, no, we need to make sure there's a buffer here. It does seem like, if you really look at it, if you really step back, these kinds of decisions, these kinds of processes help the ordinary person. So I know a lot of people criticize that, saying, "Oh, you see, you're not safe in China." Well, yeah, you know what? If you get to that level of influence, it is the opposite of the U.S. You're at a bit more of a risk when you have that much influence over society. Whereas in the U.S., when you get to that level of influence, you're on top of the world and you can almost do whatever you want. It is absolutely different.
Exactly. So that's it. That's basically the big banks, and not only US, but also the Western banks, the European banks. But they're just basically looking to China now, and they're just like, like the eyes with the with the dollar sign. They're just like that. It's like, oh my God, there's so much money to make in the next 10 years. So
You know
let's
what we
see.
should be
Let's
doing in
see what's.
China? You know what people should be doing in China? They should be figuring out where are all these investments going to be coming in, because then they can front run. They can say, you know what? Okay, I'm going to invest in these sectors, because all of a sudden there's going to be, you look at when you were talking about only 7% of people's wealth invested into stocks and investments and things like that, alternative investments. That makes you think that a lot of this stuff is probably highly undervalued. Potentially, I don't know. That's an assumption, but regardless, if all of a sudden there's an influx of money, of course these prices are going to go up. But yeah, so all right, that's the end of news on China. We're going to be off to now find investments to front run this big influx of money.
Let's make some friends in Goldman Sachs.
No, you got to make friends on this side and figure out where's Goldman Sachs coming into. Yeah, no, exactly. All right, yeah. So we, unless you had anything else on that topic, we could move on to your second story.
Yeah, sure. Can you pull up the other image, the one with about the China's youth? Did you get
sure.
that one? It's the second story is the one that we also featured in. Yeah, that's right. It was the third in that video that you showed in the beginning. So I think it's we found it very fascinating looking at the trends happening. I mean, this kind of political moment is that, okay, so the financial sector is coming in, very interesting. It's another stage in the opening up process. And at the same time, there's a kind of, let's say, a cultural response around what we're seeing is this decline in among the youth, especially the post-90s generation, starting to prefer more domestic Chinese brands, films, culture, even values over the US's, which is quite different from the generation that grew up in the opening up reform period, like in the 80s. So I think going back a little bit, in the 1980s, in that opening up period, obviously it's not just economic, it's also cultural. It's also the first generation that really got their first Nike shoes and, got to see their first Hollywood films. And it's the kind of thing that, happens and recurs around the world. People grow up with, I don't know, from Disney to Hollywood films to, eating your first McDonald's. So if anything, these are kind of the wings, if we say, of like the US empire. Last week we talked more about military. There's also, we just talked about finance capital, and the other side is the culture, because we know that US culture is really the hegemonic culture, and so one of the things tracing back, like how do we get to this point where the Chinese sort of ascendance of cultural production is that the first films of Hollywood actually came into China in the early 1990s. It came up with this period. But it was very controlled as well. You can come in, but there's also controls. So for a long time, there's only 10 foreign films a year that could come into China. And then over slowly increased to 34. And there's also kind of these joint venture schemes and it's quite strict in terms of the revenue sharing system. Usually it's 25% that goes to foreign films. So there's been a lot of complaints for many years about, this is unfair for, foreign, entry into this massive market. But that's what it is. It's been opening up more and more in recent years, even beyond the quota system. So a couple of years ago, I think in 2018, actually 42 films were allowed in. But at the same time, this is not that many when you think about, a middle class of 400 million people that have been created in the same time. So there's people who are now have the money, have the kind of time, and have the hunger for seeing this type of stuff. And what was so fascinating in researching a little bit behind this story is that in 2003, so that's not that long ago, that's less than 20 years ago, the entire Chinese film industry could produce less than 100 films, and with a revenue of less than 1 billion yuan. That's the entire film industry. Last year, obviously there's a pandemic, there's many things, but last year was the first time that the Chinese film industry surpassed the Hollywood. And it surpassed many ways, not only in revenue, number of films produced. Now it's more than 1,000 films per year being produced in China. So it went from 100 to 1,000 in about 15 years. You're talking about, obviously you have to build all the capacity, like the banks, you build infrastructure, there were 2,000 theaters maybe 10 years ago in China. There are now 11,000. So you build a film going public, because like Chinese public, I mean, up until recently weren't film movie goers. It's a recently created, consumer, let's say. And one thing we found in terms of what we shared in the headlines is that not only has the Chinese film industry really surpassed the US, is that the number of foreign films, there were some big hits that still came through, even though Hollywood took a hit. Like we had Mulan, we had Wonder Woman, the rescreening of Avatar. All of those pretty much tanked in China. They wouldn't have probably some years ago, but they just didn't do well. And the number of foreign films that actually the box office sales dropped from 36% the year before to only 16%. That means that 84% of all the revenue coming from the cinema is from domestic films. And the top 10 films of China box office were all domestic films. So, I mean, this is some of the things I mean, it's hard for people who don't speak Mandarin to watch, Chinese films, but we've been able to see some that have subtitles. There is a question also around, the kind of stories that get told. Like two of the top stories, just to give a little synopsis, I don't know if you've seen them, the Hi Mom and the My People, My Homeland. But these were the two top films of the last year.
Is that 我和我的祖国, the last one?
Yeah.
Do you know the Chinese
yeah.
name? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I saw that.
Yeah.
So you see him.
Yeah, we saw your Weibo post. Your Mandarin is excellent. It puts ours to shame. So.
I don't have one, so.
I saw that one. The other one I didn't see though. Yeah.
I mean, the Hi Mom, we haven't seen yet because we were just about to go and realize there was no subtitles, so we didn't want to felt too alienated. But that being said, okay, so it's a film about a mother-daughter. It's mother-daughter story, semi-autobiographical. It's about her. Her mother dies, and she goes back into time in the 1980s to visit her. That being said, it has now. It's a woman director and she stars in it, and it's also about a women's story. It has now become the biggest grossing movie made by a woman director ever in history.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, non-Hollywood and non-sequel, non-action, non-franchise, non-hero. It is one of those things that it's a phenomenon. Of course, there were social consequences. I mean, social impact too, like this created on Weibo and other social media. A huge kind of public response about. We covered this in a few weeks ago around young girls basically, shouting out to their moms and saying, "Hey, if I could meet you in the 80s, what advice would you give your mom?" A lot of them were like, "Don't marry my father. He's actually not a great man. You could have done way better. Don't worry about me." So this is also kind of a social phenomenon in that sense. But this film alone has earned, up in the numbers I could find up to 2 weeks ago, has earned over 5 billion yuan, just one film.
Wow. Yeah, that's
17 years ago. That's 1 billion yuan was the entire film industry. Now it's one film. So this is just the dimension of that.
Well, it's a common theme here too, which is quite interesting. Same with the movie industry, they build up their own infrastructure first, while slowly letting some outside stuff in. And then when they're confident that okay, we've got our structure set, okay, now open it up a little bit more. I remember in Canada we had a similar sort of a thing where there was, I can't remember if it was a radio or a TV regulation where you had to play a certain amount of Canadian content. So we had the idea, we had the intention to also preserve and develop Canadian culture. And we had some great Inuit films that came out also. Atunajarat, that was a production about a legend in the Inuit kind of areas of northern Canada and things like that. But they never really made it big. There's some great content coming out of Canada, some really great films from Montreal and things like that. But more or less, we're pretty much just, we're not that distinct from America. Now, maybe that's a bit more difficult. We share a border. Cultures are a little bit more similar. But, all of our major stars, Jim Carrey, William Shatner, all these people, they just go to they go to the US to make it big. We never really managed to develop our own kind of identity in the same kind of way. And I think that's important. So it's great that China did that. And now they can kind of open up a little bit more and people are choosing domestic options. Which is a great way to, again, like I said, preserve the culture and promote local. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things that we were discussing a lot about this, because this is one of the, and it's not just, we were comparing actually last night experiences around, oh, in Canada, it's basically like, because we shared the border, exactly what you said, consumes US culture without even knowing it is, it's so blended in that it's sometimes hard to figure out what is the Canadian content. That's the rule we're saying. But I mean, this is the case. I mean, whether it's in Brazil or Latin America, all through Africa, Asia, like,
no, we grow up. I mean, of course, we basically Latin America. We grow up watching U.S. movies, and then you realize after a few years, I mean, you start like reading more and understand something about the world. It's like, oh, gosh, this is how also they control us. Because, I mean, to be honest, when I was 12 years old, my dream was to go to U.S. As most of my generation, of course, you want to go to U.S. because you watch U.S. movies, you see the high schools, universities. It's like, oh, let's go to U.S. It's a nice country, best country in the world, and of course, everybody is enchanted by U.S. narratives. So then you realize when also what is the role of Hollywood in all those coups, because of course you can organize a military coup, you can establish a dictatorship, you can kill a lot of people, but you can't sustain this for a long period of time. You also need to buy people to win hearts and minds of people. And how, I mean, best way they created was Hollywood. Everybody knows that.
And Disney.
And Disney.
Because you get them while you're young. I mean, if you actually look back at the Donald Duck series, especially the versions that are in Latin America, it's amazing. Like, it's basically justification of imperialism. But this is the stuff that, whether it's Tintin or other things,
they openly advertise also. Like the Department of Defense posted something saying they work closely with Hollywood to make sure that they're portrayed correctly in movies. It's like, you're not supposed to admit that out loud. Marvel had an event in Florida. They canceled it because of the outrage. They had an event with I can't remember which company it was, North something, but it was a military industrial complex manufacturer, and they were doing a joint. Yeah, that's it. And they were going to do the event in Florida, and people were outraged. It was like, okay, no, come on, guys, you can. We can accept Tony Stark being a military weapons manufacturer in your movies, but don't start really cooperating with actual real military industrial complex. It was really amazing. But yeah, no, it controls the narrative in that regard too. But it's not like these countries. I mean, these countries try to, in Canada, we really wanted to have our own identity. One of the most popular commercials of all time was that Molson commercial where he's like, I am Canadian. He's talking about, I don't know Sue or Sally from Canada, but I'm sure they're nice people. And it goes through like all the stereotypes about Canadians. We grow up talking about the War of 1812, how we fought back against the U.S. And we always talk about Laura Secord, the woman who ran from Niagara Falls area, that area, all the way to Toronto to warn that the Americans were coming. And we even made a chocolate company after it. And then finally, the Americans bought that chocolate company. Now Laura Secord is an American company.
Molson is also owned by the U.S.
Yeah. I think AB InBev, if I'm correctly. Yeah. So now there's no escaping it. Yeah.
I mean, actually, it's really funny. You mentioned this thing about the open collaboration between military and Hollywood. I was just looking back because there's a lot of criticism around, the censorship in China, you don't allow these kinds of content in. When you look at actually some of the rules, it's like, they should promote core socialist values, should have positivity about the nation's development, shouldn't have too much sex, drugs, and violence. Okay, that aside, but I mean, the foundation of the Hollywood is very much ideological. There's this thing, I just love it, because when I found out, I don't know if you or any of your viewers have heard of Ayn Rand, who was a Russian-American philosopher and writer. She's like the architect behind this whole idea of objectivism. So basically saying that capitalism is amazing, individualism is amazing, reason is amazing, and that's like the pillars of US ideals and values. So she wrote books like Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, which she was really well known for. But she wrote another text that's less known in 1947, and it was actually for the Screen Guide for Americans. It was written for an organization, the Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Ideals. So it was, clearly from the foundation, is a way to kind of root out some of the, at that point, it's entering the McCarthyist era, so the anti-communist and also to celebrate the pro-capitalist and pro-imperialist values. So in it, I just want to name a couple of things. It's very clear when they say, don't smear the capitalist or free enterprise system, because you can't attack they clarify, don't attack individual rights, individual freedoms, or private property. Don't smear wealth. Don't glorify the collective. Don't deify the common man. And then it says, remember that it is the communists that tried to preach the supremacy, superiority, and the holy virtue of the group as opposed to the individual. And it also says, don't smear American political institutions. They have their own version of censorship. It just has a very difficult.
Yeah. And they're better. They're better at pushing. They're better at not so much about what they don't say, but about what they do say to guide people in the right direction. That's what they're really, really good at. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and one thing, I mean, one of my people in my homeland, when we went to see the film, it's like, so one of the top 3 films of last year. And what was the film about? It was about poverty alleviation, but it was a comedy. And it's a series of 5 stories about how poverty alleviation is done. But it's like funny, you laugh, you cry, it's great. And one of the stories is like, just to go into it slightly, I think we have some minutes. It's Ma Liang. So he starts with saying, I'm from this hometown, this town, this county, this city. I live 6,000 kilometers from my hometown. And it's all this kind of like, what is your relationship to your hometown? But the story is that he is about to go to Russia, to St. Petersburg, maybe, to a fine arts institute to become a fancy painter. And that's what his wife wants him to do. It's what he's been doing his whole life. But instead, what he really wants to do is go be deployed as a party member to a poverty-stricken village. So he does that, but he the whole time he's created this whole facade to trick his wife that he went to study fancy fine art. Yeah. And so the whole story is basically your neighbors, you have like your peasant workers, you have party members in this huge scheme of how to make sure his wife who's pregnant isn't upset. And, you have funny things like the village chief is actually like dressing up as a Russian roommate, learning some Russian words, just so when she calls, on video calls, and it's like, oh, that Russian roommate is waking up. Sorry, honey, let me call you right back.
And then suddenly there's a problem with internet. So everybody's like this, like it's frozen because there's something happening. They can't show.
Yeah. It's really funny.
Question.
Yeah, it's like,
It's funny thinking back on this, like a screen guy.
It's the opposite. It's the opposite of the US guy.
The whole thing is just like collectivity, work is great. It's about promoting a national governmental program. Right. It's funny. You have top actors. It's Zhang Yimou, who was the producer, so one of the top A-level types. So I mean, you're getting that kind of level of production that's funny and enjoyable, and it's talking like what we started this story with around this, seeing the last 20 years of the development of the cultural production to a level that where you have people in tier 1 cities like in Shanghai wanting to go and pay money and spend their leisure time to watch this film and make billions in revenue. I mean, it's really phenomenal.
Yeah, it is.
Can't imagine a Hollywood film like producing this public, but also this type of content in this kind of form.
This type of message, yeah.
And
it's actually
no, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I mean, it's so inbuilt, the opposite thing. I remember, I'm not sure if you saw, I posted on Twitter some of the there was a Disney show that showed these 3 girls who were interested in learning a bit about communism. And they really shamed them. They basically shamed them in front of the class saying, no, you're common. And then they're like, oh yeah, communist. I should be an individual. I should have, because what happened was they ended up getting the highest score in class because they worked together. They worked together on their project. And but the teacher, even though they produced the best result, the teacher failed them, if I remember correctly, or they gave them they gave them a C. That's right, C for communism instead of an A. And the reason was just because you worked together to accomplish this. It's like, oh my God, like what's wrong with that? Like, you worked together to accomplish the best possible outcome, and you're being shamed because you didn't do it as an individual. And that was built into a Disney show. And of course, they had them dressed up in these like really stereotypical communist outfits and stuff like that while they were doing it, to teach kids that no, individualism, thinking about yourself, is the most important thing you should do. And it really is the complete opposite.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
No, it's just like because the power of Hollywood and of course everything that comes, all the values that comes and history and etc. I mean, this was something that when I first came to China a few years ago, like just like for a few days, and then when I moved last year, one thing that really impressed me, I didn't expect, was to see, at least of course in big cities, especially Shanghai, but also a little bit Beijing, is like this the Americanization of especially of the young people. And of course, I mean, we know has to do with the reform opening up and all the relationship that was created with the U.S. But I remember talking to a friend, and we were discussing about like Second World War, etc. And then I asked her, it's like, okay, but who do you think who won the Second World War? She's Chinese and very well educated. She spent like 6 years doing masters in the US, blah, 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 and studying. And she said, oh, who won the Second World War? Oh, United States. I was like, really? But how, where did you learn that? Oh, it's so many movies about that. I was like, my God, imagine, this is a well-educated Chinese, like 26, 27 years old, that doesn't know that 20 million Chinese people died and 27 million Soviet people died to win the war against Nazism, against the fascists, and we are in China. So I mean, this is the power of Hollywood. So it's interesting to see at these last discussions and even the article we published in the digest, to see there's a different trend starting to developing in China, and youth looks like it's sort of decoupling a little bit from U.S. culture and turn into Chinese values, Chinese culture, Chinese movies,
and not for lack of access. That's what's interesting.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, like we've been following a lot the film parts, but there's other parts as well. You know, like U.S. brands, like many, especially in the fashion aspect, they've just left China. You know, especially since like 2018, they haven't been able to thrive. Like Old Navy, Esprit, or Forever 21, these pretty big U.S. multinationals pulled out of China. But then the brands that stayed, who might have maybe in 20 years ago were the trendsetters, like the McDonald's, the KFC, the Starbucks, aren't able to do that role. If they stay, they have to change their approach and sort of localize or kind of cater to the Chinese tastes. So it's interesting that we're seeing not only compared to the previous generation, there's taste for more, and there's more of a pride in the development of the Chinese style democracy. Yeah, this is great. I'm glad you pulled this up. Is that my first time coming back to China? I mean, I'm from Hong Kong, but I grew up in Canada. My first time really spending time was in 2005. 2000. When was I go there? 2005, more or less. So I went to the Forbidden Palace for the first time. You know, wow, how many 9 emperors, like the last Qing emperor. It's like this mythological place, right? And I went in, and there was a Starbucks in the Forbidden Palace. You know, I mean, it's been closed since 2007. But it's a kind of thing, like I think in the opening up story of opening up to U.S. culture and economy meant that there was an absorption of these values, but we're actually perhaps seeing a shift away now, now also because the products and culture have developed such a way, and there's a pride in domestic culture that it would be unthinkable right now that if there was a proposal for a Starbucks to open up in Forbidden City.
You know what? Yeah, you know what? 3 years ago, when I was looking, a lot of people know I have a brew pub. I don't usually like to mention it in my channel, but
it's a very
3 years ago,
by the way,
3 years ago, when I was looking for a new location, a lot of the new shopping malls open had approached me because they see me as a local brand. My brand was born in Shenzhen. It's here. It's beer made in China, craft beer made in China. A lot of the malls, when they were approaching me, they really wanted me to go in, and they were not going to the usual suspects like Starbucks and KFC and stuff like that. They said, we want to do something different. We want to, have some more local brands in here, homegrown brands. And as a Shenzhen brand, we'd really love to have you come in. So that was already a transition happening about 3 years ago. And now we're seeing that come through in a bigger way. I mean, the quality of product that you get in China now too. You know, like for me, in my next vehicle, if NIO comes out with, anybody from NIO, if you're listening, if NIO, the electric car brand, if they come out with a 7-seat minivan, you know, like those mom-mobiles, I am 100% in. I'm gonna buy one. I just found out that Hongqi, you know, Hongqi, the brand that all the presidents, you know, drive through, the, you know, those old, they look like the Chinese Rolls Royce, basically. You know, they have some electric cars. They've got one that apparently is a 7-seat. And so I was going to go look at that. I have a friend, a local Chinese friend here who works as a salesperson there. And I found he contacted me after my video went viral. It's like, oh, yeah, is that you? I said, yeah. How you been? I haven't heard from you in a while. Where are you working? I'm at Hongqi now. I said, oh, you know what? And I started talking about it. They've got electric cars now, and they've got a 7-seat one. So I was going to go and do a video with him. And I was looking at Hongqi before. And one of the things I wanted to do was like, I wanted to just do something funny. I wanted to do a review on the new electric Hongqi car. And I wanted to do something funny where I stood out of the sunroof while we were driving down the street, and while somebody was taking the video. But after my video went viral, I was like, I'm not going to do that anymore, because people are going to be like, all right, you get 5 minutes of fame, and all of a sudden you think you're Xi Jinping. Who is this guy? You know?
Sky's the limit.
Yeah, it's like, who does this guy think he is? I'm like, all right, I'm not going to do that. I might still review the Hongqi car, but I'm not going to stick my head out of the sunroof anymore.
Well, you're afraid of Hua Chunying now, so
yeah, that was crazy. I mean, your last story pretty much tied into everything you were saying. I think you already covered that, right? The young Chinese were born, you know, 1990 onwards are more accepting of the China's early socialist history. Or did you have more to add on that topic?
No,
that was yeah. So no, I mean, we could finish off with that video. I mean, you guys saw it too. You sent it to me. Did you have some friends in Brazil that were talking about it as well, or you said the embassy in Brazil reshared?
Yeah, it was the Chinese consul in Rio de Janeiro, and actually in city I was born. Yeah.
Right, in Rio.
In Rio de Janeiro. Yeah, actually he tweeted. He actually sent the both videos, like the whole panel, but also your piece. And it was viralizing in Brazil too. Like, it was very, very popular. I mean, even being in English, but
it is surreal what's happened. Like for you guys who don't know, it was played. My video, my 12-minute rant, was played by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs at their press conference, and it's just been shared. It's probably, somebody was looking at the different links and saying it's probably been seen like over 100 million times. It's like, you know, Ooh. But now, so now, what's happening is obviously Western media is going to start picking up on it, and they're going to have a little bit of a different take on it. So the first one that came out with was a SCMP, Southern China Morning Post, did an article on me, and it was okay. It tried to be. I felt like it was like really anti-China people trying to make a neutral article, but it had a lot of innuendos in there that led people towards a different direction. So there's a lot more criticism from overseas people who have a very strict anti-China idea on it. So now I'm going from famous to infamous, but you know, that's, you know, I'll finish off, you know, by sharing. Actually, I said at the beginning of the video, maybe I'll share a tweet with you on that. So there was a guy, he's a lawyer in Washington, D.C. And I'm sharing this because I did in my last video, I shared some of my tweets and people really liked it. They said, do more of that. So I'll fit this in here for a pretty cool discussion too. So this is what a lawyer in Washington, D.C. had to say. So he says, the latest example of the Chinese government's view that you've got to have a white foreign face to be ready to be credible. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs actually played a video at an official press conference of a white bar owner in Shenzhen. You know, on Xinjiang. Yeah, that'll settle things once and for all. So I find that interesting. So I get called white a lot. I don't know. I was like,
I didn't notice you were white. That's the first time.
I don't. Only the beard. A part of the beard. Nothing else.
Yeah. So I mean, it's an interesting thing. Like, I feel like it. So I've had friends who are not hostile towards me. I have a friend who's a chef. Who used to work for actually Gordon Ramsay, really accomplished guy. And we were sitting down at my bar a few years ago, and he was talking to me about something. And he says, but, you know, for white guys like us, and I was like, I didn't say anything, but I was like, hold on a second. But I think, you know, I think I almost feel like it's, if you speak like them and you care about the same things about them, or you use the same kinds of language, you all of a sudden lose your color. You're just one of them. And I think it's a little bit condescending. It's like, as long as you don't speak with an accent, as long as you can articulate yourself in a way that I like, you're white. You lose your ethnic identity, which is almost a kind of a way of marginalizing people who they don't call white, who are this exact same shade of skin as me. It's a weird, I haven't really wrapped my head around it, why I get called white so often. But I find it fascinating. So I replied to him in a 3-part thread, which I kind of enjoyed. So I started off by saying, let's see here. I don't know if it's already showing up on your screen.
Yep.
It's taking, the only thing that's been more interesting than seeing my video reduce folks down to desperate ad hominem attacks is seeing how widespread an issue color blindness is. Although not sure if this white part is meant to award me more privilege and include me into their white boy club. So like there's this meme going around. I don't know. Yeah, I'm white, and so like I saw this meme going around like white boy summer or something like that. I don't know what it means, and I haven't looked into it, so that's why I said white boy. It wasn't meant to be derogatory, but then I'm the second part of that tweet is from what I've seen over the past year, when folks sink this low to marginalize my opinions, sometimes there are guys who once defended AOC against being attacked on the basis of having bartended and just suffer from a bad case of hypocrisy, or they're just simply full-time elitist assholes. So that really happened, actually. That really happened where there was a guy from Hong Kong. He was like, oh, this guy, he's a guy who just knows how to pour a beer or something like that. Why would you listen to him? And literally in his history, he was defending AOC against people marginalizing her because she worked as a bartender. It's like, whoa, hold on a second. What's going on here? Then the final one, somebody had posted under my thread when it was a 2-part thread. He said, Daniel, you've made it. And so my response to that, sometimes it takes a couple seconds to show up on my screen. It's still loading here slowly. There we go. Yeah. So I said, yeah, true. For every brown boy out there growing up around racism who wish they were white at some point, I'm living proof that if you gain enough recognition in something, you too can be considered white. But stay away from the service industry, apparently, though.
No, I was just thinking about your story about sitting at the ethnic table at the white town of Newmarket. You're like the little boy, and yes, Daniel, you'll make it one day. You'll get to join the white table.
I don't have to sit at the minority table anymore. Yeah. Oh, it's wild. It's wild seeing like not people like in my 12-minute kind of speech. I talk about the problem with the narrative, the intentions behind it. I talk about some of the problematic issues with some of the testimonies that came up about Xinjiang, and people just skip all over that. In that article, they also mention Max Blumenthal, and they say, oh, some people have said that he whitewashes, Assad and all these people, and they didn't actually mention any of his arguments where he's like, Adrian Zenitz literally misquoted the reports. These are literally lies. Like the article didn't even mention that. So it's interesting to see. It would have been nice to have a legitimate conversation of people coming back and saying, okay, this is why I have a problem with your argument. No, it's none of that. It's just like you're a bartender. Why are we going to listen to you or whatever? It's like, or you're just a white guy in China. I was like, okay, well, that's the weirdest argument. Yeah. But so I think you don't have any more stories. I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to finish on, or we managed. Nice. We actually managed to shorten the length of the video this time.
Yeah.
This is the first time it didn't go up. So let's quit while we're ahead, guys. Everybody, as we mentioned in the description, you'll see all of the links to the channels of Tings and Marco and the actual website, both the YouTube, the website, and the Twitter. Follow them over there. And then next week, I'm going to be on the road. I'm going to be in Zhejiang. So probably what I'll try to do is I'll try to just do it from my RV. The image quality won't be as good.
Cool.
But it will be
China on the road.
Have a new name.
Yes, that's what it's going to be. That's what it's going to be. You shouldn't have given it away too early, but yeah, that's what it's going to be.
Well, you can help it. It sounded so good. Rolled off the tongue.
All right, guys. As always, it's been so much fun, and I will talk to you throughout the week, and we'll record next time. We'll join everybody else next week again.
Safe travel.
Peace. Take care. Yeah. Thanks.